Hello, my name is Levi. I recently just finished a reading journey of my first reading of Moby-Dick, and I wanted to share with you guys what I thought, as well as kind of point you in the direction of if you should or should not read this book. And overall, just answer the question of why is this book considered great? The way I'm going to do this is we'll just talk about kind of what I enjoyed about the book first, and then we can go into a bit more of like the negatives that I say I had when I was reading this. First off, I guess we'll start with plot. It's normally a pretty important portion of a book, and I think Moby-Dick's plot at times was riveting and other times was non-existent. But overall, I would say I enjoyed the plot when it was there. I think the first highlights of the book were like the first couple of chapters for me, before he actually leaves Nantucket. I think that part of the book was really compelling to read, as well as the ending. I think the ending towards the end of the book was a page turner. I think that it picked up a lot and we focused back on the plot. The middle had one of my favorite chapters plot-wise, Cisterns and Buckets, but it also was by no means always driving the plot forward. In fact, I think that it felt like I was on this whaling expedition. And that's kind of what I wanted to say. I feel like this book is so great. I think I understand why people view this so positively, is because it encapsulates a time period and an archaic form, like an archaic career an industry that we don't really have around nowadays in a very extensive way. If you're anything like me, then you go into this book with zero knowledge about 19th century whaling, and you leave with a general feeling that you went whaling. This book took me multiple weeks to read, and I feel like I was transported somewhere that I haven't been transported by a lot of other books. And there's a lot of things to add to this. I think the journey feels rather arduous, but I think a whaling journey is also rather arduous. And there's ups and there's downs, just like how there would be in actually going whaling. I'm going to try to kind of keep things as spoiler-free as possible, so that if you want to read this book, which I think that if you have interest in reading this book, which just essentially, if you don't know, it's just about a man going after a whale, you should read it. It's something that I think people either love or hate, and I don't really know which one I am. Let's move on to characters though. So positively for characters, I think the highlight of the show and the book is Captain Ahab. I think Captain Ahab and his Shakespearean monomania is what really, it's the character that was drawn to the most. In fact, I feel like some of the other characters are very open, and they're not too fleshed out. Just like the plot, this is by no means a super fleshed out plot or characters. I think the only one that's really fleshed out is Captain Ahab, and Ishmael is almost just a vessel for seeing Captain Ahab in a way, at least from what I experienced. If you've ever talked to anyone who's read this book, they'll tell you that there's a lot of whale facts in this book, and that is true. And that is one of the derogatory things I think I experienced in this book. Don't get me wrong, there are some of those chapters where you're talking about whale facts that are incredibly philosophical, or the science is very interesting, and then there's others that just feel like, okay, I really could do without this information. But I think that symbolizes the journey, like I said, of actually going on a whaling expedition. And whenever you leave, you feel like you learn something. You feel like you learn actual real world stuff about whaling that most novels that were covering whaling wouldn't actually give you. I think that this is great for that reason. It encapsulates a time period so well, like I said, but it is arduous. It is difficult to read. It's verbose. There's a lack of straight plot direction. There's sometimes weird tangents you go on, but in itself, it is a very interesting writing style. It's almost like an encyclopedia on whaling, but then you also have a story or an anecdote example going on in the background. And there's also just some beautifully profound writing in here, or some cool philosophical insights. Even just the first paragraph of the book, that iconic "Call me Ishmael," that paragraph is so captivating, and just there's something there that, you get that feeling whenever you're reading sometimes and something just strikes you the right way and you feel it in your spine. This book has a lot of those moments. I really appreciated when I read them, even in some of the more weird chapters. But I can't say that I enjoyed going through 3 chapters about all the different ways that whales get depicted, or biologically breaking down the whale in every part. It has its place though, and I think Moby-Dick was a book that I loved and I hated at times, and I think that's okay. I think it's a book that you should explore too, because I think it does signify a hero's journey, and a hero's journey is going to have some really exciting spots, some really low spots. It's going to have some boring spots and some fast-paced things, but it's going to have all that, and at the end you get to reach whatever it is your goal, or maybe you don't. I don't know if that made sense or not. It also kind of touches on the psychology of being driven by one idea and being obsessive. And I think I can relate to that in a ways, because a lot of things I do in my life, I can't just do half-heartedly. And that way I kind of relate to Ahab's obsession with getting revenge on this whale who has taken his leg from him. The obsession to the point where it is negative. It's negatively influencing him and all the people around him. And even though he is aware of that, he continues forward because he views that as his purpose. And I think that there's a lot of poetic stuff in this book, and there's some really interesting things, but I do think that it is a difficult book to read. I think it's a book that you should approach with respect. You should approach it and understand that you don't have to understand everything. I could tell you that there's some chapters in here that I read, some sentences that I read multiple times, and I could not tell you what was happening. I tried my best to understand everything I could, but I did not understand everything. And that's why I think it's a book that people return to. It's also just a great American work. I think that this is considered one of the best American novels of all time, and I can see why, but I think it's more than just a novel. It's not necessarily quantifiable in just a novel. It's almost like an amalgamation of all the knowledge of this time period written through the form of a novel, and I think that that is a very difficult thing to do. I don't even know if this would be as interesting if whaling was still an industry and all this information was still current. Because it was so foreign to me, I felt like I was learning something that I couldn't really learn in my everyday life, and that was cool. That's why I kind of appreciated some of the whaling facts. But overall, I think Moby-Dick is great because it challenges the traditional writing style of a novel. It encapsulates a time period in an industry that is completely archaic and done away with in our current present day times. And it has some great symbolism and some vague characters that you can relate with and see yourself in. But I think it's also very difficult because it's very verbose, it's very challenging, there's some weird tangents you go on. Some of the other characters aren't incredibly fleshed out, even if you would like to spend more time with them. There is lots of whale facts. It's almost like a whaling encyclopedia. It can get very arduous at times, but overall, I think the journey's worth it. My name's Levi, and I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.